Coming up, the injury update for Daniel Jones is not optimistic for the week ahead. We also take a look at key roster moves and what they could mean for how Joe Shane and the Giants feel about this team in the short term. And then a critical stat that may suggest Tyrod Taylor, at least in the small sample size, has outperformed Daniel Jones. We dive in next. Yes, sir. It's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where we are your host. Over here, Adam Armbrecht. Over there, Andrew Makowitz. And our midweek update, Andy, is not going to be filled with all sunshine and rainbows for Big Blue. Starting, obviously, with Daniel Jones. Brian Dable asked about Daniel Jones. His responses look something like this. Has he been cleared for contact? Brian Dable, yeah, well, he's cleared to throw. So that's what he's going to do today is throw. When the doctors and trainers tell me he's ready to go, that's when he'll be ready to go. Is Daniel Jones playing this week, Andy?
Judging by Brian Dable's history of saying everyone is day to day, which really means week to week, and everyone
Month
that's
to
week
month.
to week probably could be on season-ending IR, something tells me that there's a very, very slim chance in my mind that Daniel Jones plays, because just remember, he did not participate in practice at all last week. Limited practice, no contact, obviously, but we're trending in the right direction. How quickly we move in that right direction remains to be seen.
Yeah, I guess I am curious about it, right? And especially, listen, we're recording on Wednesday afternoon, so you still have Thursday, you still have Friday. There's time for this to get better in a hurry for him. And we'll kind of touch back on this after we discuss other injury notes and then roster moves and where this team is right now and how they'll probably treat his health. So we'll pause on our speculation around what this means and then hit the other injury updates for this roster before we talk moves.
Couldn't agree more. The simple answer, Adam, is in regards to Daniel Jones. Remember, Brian Dable did the same thing with Saquon Barkley. It doesn't actually really benefit the Giants to say that he's going to have contact, he's going to play. Like,
Sure.
this is a legitimate chance for them to have to prepare for both Tyrod Taylor and Daniel Jones. Sometimes it feels like, yeah, right. I'm sure after a high ankle sprain, Saquon's going to get out there on a short week against San Francisco 49ers. We all know that's crazy. This one, you may want to, plant the seed that there is an opportunity for Jones to play, so that they have to prepare for it.
On the injury front, beyond Daniel Jones, 5 Giants that didn't practice on Wednesday, care of Jordan Renan here, Andrew Thomas with the hamstring, and Evan Neal with the ankle, John Michael Schmitz with the shoulder, Matt Parrott with the shoulder, Wan'Dale Robinson with the knee, and then limited Daniel Jones, Saquon Barkley, Adoree Jackson, Graham Gano. Nothing really surprising or maybe terribly concerning, although Adoree Jackson, I'm just like curious because that was a weird hit he took in that last game. I couldn't tell if it was like an equipment thing that happened there versus the way his head hit. He just seems very speculative around what's going to happen with him. How are we feeling about the still long list, especially when it comes to the offensive line?
Yeah, I mean, knowing that Saquon Barkley looked good, seemed to
Mhm.
come out of the Buffalo game relatively unscathed, you could tell, while a couple of those rushes were only for 2 or 3 yards and the line wasn't doing him any favors, you still see the big play capabilities, off of 2 runs, getting 53 yards. That is the way the Giants need to be able to move the ball through the run game. And so I'm encouraged to see that he had no slip ups. Feels like as long as things continue down the path, he's going to play. And we don't think that that ankle injury seems to be lingering. But again, Saquon has had his injury issues before. The other one's Adoree Jackson. He came back in the game. So, nothing really too concerning other than Andrew Thomas and whether or not Daniel Jones can play. Those are the two big question marks to me. If for some miraculous reason both of them were able to go against Washington and were fully healthy, it would feel like a big boost to the offense.
Oh yeah, 100%. Obviously, anybody from that starting core getting back out there on the field is going to be a good thing. As we turn our attention over to moves that were made, because the Giants had to make a kind of a critical decision with Justin Pugh. I will just throw in this exchange. Reporter asked, "Dabes, do you think the line improved with Pugh in there?" Brian Dable, "Well, everyone likes to get Christmas presents. You know what I mean?" Reporter, "Are you saying Pugh was a Christmas present to the team?" Dable, "I'm not going to say one way or the other. All I'm going to say is that we are going to follow the process and everyone has to pay taxes. I don't know what I'm supposed to do." Like, it gets put out there as like, Brian, please.
Dave's. Dave's, you're the one that brought up the Christmas presents. The reporter didn't bring up you brought it up. So like that was a really natural question to ask is like,
Right?
wait, I didn't did anybody say Christmas presents around here? Are you saying that Justin Pugh was a Christmas present? Like you pulled him off the couch. Literally, that's what his Sunday Night Football thing was. Like just came off the couch. Really interesting. I do, the one thing on Justin Pugh that I will say
Yeah.
is he is clearly saying all the right things too. Like you saw all the reporters smiling. He said, like, if this was my last game and I didn't have it, I would go out as a happy man, knowing that I gave it a try for the team that I grew up rooting for, my favorite, ultimately favorite team. And then it goes into after the game felt pretty good. The next morning they called up my agent and said, "Let's get it done." I know that there was a little trepidation for a lot of Giant fans, being like, "Wait, there were some other signings. How is Justin Pugh not on this roster?" Art Stapleton and others were like, "Remember, he values himself more than a veteran minimum guy. Like maybe there's a situation where he could go elsewhere and get a couple million rather than play for the Giants." I think everything cooled down, cooler heads prevailed, and it was like he did give up a couple sacks and a few pressures here and there. So like I don't know if another team is jumping to throw him in their lineup. It just shows how ineffective the Giants offensive line has been with the players that they've had.
Yeah, and I found it curious too because I think fans were saying, well, and we were talking about it before throughout the week. Basically, it's like, oh, if you don't bring him back, I mean, good lord, you need him. Andrew Thomas is injured, whether it's going to be tackle, guard, whatever. Like you need healthy bodies, guys that look competent out there. And then I also thought, well, I know we saw Julio Jones getting signed by the Eagles, and everyone's looking over at their GM saying, what is money? Why do we always talk about cap and money? The Giants, seem to be restricted like other teams aren't. But I was prepared for a team to see his play and say, hey, we need some help here. We're going for a deep playoff run. The Giants at least acknowledge in that move, and also bringing back Tyree Phillips off of the Philadelphia practice squad here while waving hopefully Mayfield back to the practice squad young player. It's, hey, like we know we need help in this area. And do you feel like this is an indication, as they unfortunately had to let go of Lawrence Cager, this just isn't the season for superfluous offensive tight end weapons? It
Yeah,
Does this
I
feel
mean,
like in the
he's
yeah,
the third string tight end. We're not even using our second string tight end. We're not even really getting our first string tight end involved.
right.
We need more linemen than you could ever imagine to help block so that we have a functioning offense. Like a third tight end, while Lawrence Cager, I know he's a fan favorite of yours and he can be dynamic on the offensive side. He's just he's kind of an afterthought, and you could see that they basically said, we prioritize offensive line help right now more than having someone like Cager in the building.
Better late than never, right? I mean, like, yeah, in the offseason, I was excited for Cage and what I thought he could be in this offense, wave after wave of threats. But to your point, he's third on the depth chart, and you can't even get to the second guy on the depth chart. We can't even get to the number ones on our depth chart half the time. So what are we talking about? So just moves that had to get made here. Does this to you indicate anything about the way the Giants are thinking about this entire season? Or as I look at it, this is still about that short-term window, the next couple of games. If you can win against the Washington Commanders, if you could win against the Jets, then you're trying to hold this together for a little bit longer, coming up to that trade deadline date that you've kept continuously correctly bringing up, as this is when we'll ultimately see the proof in the pudding about how Joe Shane feels.
I think the Giants are just in a very desperate spot across the offensive line. They also signed offensive tackle Josh Miles off the Atlanta
Yes.
Falcons practice squad as well. I don't think he's ever
Pick him
started a
up.
game in his career too, but let's bring him up. Let's see what we've got. Adam, it's a very rare in this day and age in the NFL that you pull three guys off the
Yeah.
street for offensive linemen to be on the active roster in a 24-hour period. That's literally almost unheard of. It shows the desperation that the Giants have. You look at Joshua Zudu with the toe injury. He went out early in the game against Buffalo. He got put
IR
on
for him.
IR,
Yeah.
not able to play. You already had one spot. Jalen Mayfield, you saw a little bit of what he can do, and you're thinking, okay, we know what the floor is with him. Like, is there anyone else that can play maybe a little bit better than that? And
Mhm.
it just shows that, like, Justin Pugh did enough to warrant being on this active roster. They're looking for help literally anywhere right now.
Last note on the moves that were made. How confounding is the Phillips piece? I mean, none of us are sitting here. We made the comparisons with Parrott and the PFF grades, and neither one of them is a stalwart. But Parrott, we've talked about this. Izudu got elevated to play left tackle before Parrott did. Like, why? He's a holdover pick from the previous regime. He didn't make a very positive impression. He's younger, okay, fine, but Phillips played for you. Phillips played last year and at least showed that he knew the system. I come back to that. I don't think it would have changed the wins and losses. Let me be clear, right? Everything that happened, I don't think it would have mattered. But I still find it weird. Like, I still find it weird that Phillips was let go, Parrott was held on to, and ultimately you circle right back around and bring him back to your roster midway through this season, practically.
Yeah, I mean, he's only 26 years old. He started
He's a year,
5
only a
games
year
for the
older
Giants. Yeah,
than
Big Blue
Parrott.
View put up a good synopsis. He played 45% of the offensive snaps last year. He had a 50 Pro Football Focus grade. So, like, look, he's not tearing it up, doing anything else. Surprising that he didn't land back on the Giants practice squad, went to the Eagles, who feel like they have one of the best offensive lines in the league. Like, he didn't think that there was an opportunity to be able to come back into the fold with the Giants. It just seems a little bit odd. Like, Adam, I'll be honest with you. When he didn't get signed immediately, I thought there was no way that he was ever going to come back to this roster, because it was like, no, that ship has sailed. We have no interest in him for a whole host of reasons. But
Right,
like
right.
10,
Yeah.
10, 12 days later, you're like, no, just kidding. Like, I know we cut him and we had a chance to sign him. We didn't sign him. Now we're bringing him back. It really doesn't make sense. Like, either you want him there as soon as possible because he has familiarity instead of pulling Justin Pugh literally off the couch, but instead you wait and then you sign him. It really doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know what other way to put it.
You brought up Mayfield. Yeah, like you're playing these young guys. You're bringing up kids off the practice squad. You're getting them he's there. There's no point to try to dissect it because here it is, and he's back. And who knows? He's getting brought back in, but does that mean that he's going to be a part of the rotation at all? Like, I don't know. In theory, you'd say there he is at left tackle. There's Pugh staying at guard, right? And you kind of go back to this semblance of what you think this could be. But it's always going to be the wait and see, because how do we know that he's going to be ready to plug in there and play that starting role, knowing that he was mid to below average at best a season ago?
Well, this also puts targets or bullseyes or emphasis on guys like Shane Lemieux and Matt Pert. Like,
Oh, they're done.
are they even reserve guys that you can put into an NFL football game and just be the level that Tyree Phillips was? I
Yeah, and
think
why
we've
is yeah,
seen so
and
far.
why is Parrott still here, right? Like, I don't even
I,
I'm not
I
knocking the
think
guy. As a fan come out, you cut Lawrence Cager. I'm not arguing with that. He's the third on the depth chart. You don't use him, but I can make a stronger case. You might as well just keep Lawrence Cager. Like, he can do some things if that opportunity arises. But you keep Parrott, who you keep bringing in and elevating other people over. I cannot figure it out.
Justin Pugh was just off the street, had never played left tackle in his life, and they threw him out there over Matt Pert. And it's like, if that's the level that you believe in that player, when are you ever going to play him? Like, at
Yeah.
that point, give Jalen Mayfield more reps at that. Like,
Yes.
he's
Yes.
not even cracking backup swing tackle at this point. And so for me, it's a little bit strange, but desperate times call for desperate measures. I wouldn't be surprised once all the transactions are done with Pugh, if Shane Lemieux or Pert or someone else from that group of misfit toys ends up, getting waived, maybe coming back to the practice squad. We'll see.
Troubling information then to close out this show. I had deposited this notion, even going back to before Daniel Jones' injury, and comparing Tyrod Taylor and Daniel Jones as models of quarterback. And when you have bad offensive line play, mobility, scrambling quarterbacks are always going to be at a little bit of an advantage relative to shifting and collapsing pockets. Anthony Rivardo put this out, which by PFF standards, Daniel Jones is responsible for 20% of his pressures this season. Tyrod Taylor is responsible for only 7.7% of his pressures that he has faced this season. Now, we know the sample size is significantly smaller for Tyrod. Came in relief in one game and then played the entirety of last week's contest as well. That being said, though, when it was asked about, oh, well, Saquon Barkley, and I want to get into him being factored into this anyway, Anthony accurately repointed out that weeks 1 and 2, when Saquon was there and healthy, Daniel Jones still was responsible for 20%. In this previous game, when Tyrod was at the helm, Tyrod was responsible for 14%. What does this mean to you in the spectrum of trying to analyze Daniel Jones as a quarterback, never wanting to put them in the category of, well, 34-year-old Tyrod Taylor might be better, but there's just a world where, and someone pointed this out too, understanding of NFL defenses, which is something you can sometimes only gain by being in the league for a decade plus, like Tyrod has, that affords you the ability to be a little bit quicker and, with his natural athleticism, a little bit more effective with an offensive line as currently constituted.
I think that a lot of statements that I'm going to say in a row can be true. And I'd like you to
Okay.
stop me if you don't believe any of these statements that I'm going to make.
All
Because
right.
some people may say they fly in the face of each other. I would say that I'm building up the story on this.
Hmm.
So Daniel Jones has been a problem where he has forced himself into unnecessary pressures, which is hurting this offense from functioning. Fine
Agreed.
statement, right?
Yep.
If you remove the pressures that Daniel Jones has forced himself and you extrapolate that over a 17-game season, the New York Giants would still hold the single season record for the most pressures given up by any offensive line ever, right? So, like,
Mwah.
when you think about that, you can say two things are true. One, this is a historically all time bad offensive line regardless of what quarterback is back there. But
Yes.
also, Daniel Jones is not doing himself any favors by running himself into pressures that it seems Tyrod Taylor is slightly avoiding. And I think to your point, small sample size, we'll see if that continues to stick. But maybe behind this horrific offensive line, maybe right now Tyrod Taylor is performing better behind that offensive line. Again, small sample size. Tyrod didn't score a touchdown either. So we're talking about one bad versus another squint your eyes, okay situation. But Adam, the offensive line is bad regardless of what quarterback is back there. I do think that Daniel Jones is not doing himself any favors with the amount of pressure he's running himself into.
And worth noting here too, inside of those, and I agree with that sentiment, and I have maybe a bit of a broader statement to make about it. A percentage of dropbacks with some responsibility when you can prescribe to where it goes. It's worth noting here too that when you look at Daniel Jones versus Tyrod Taylor, the left tackle responsibility, as that's gotten worse and worse as the season has progressed, 30.8% of the dropbacks have fallen on the left tackle when Tyrod played, where it was under 19% for Daniel Jones. He had some Andrew Thomas mixed in there. Every other position, relatively speaking, stays pretty consistent. Right tackle with mostly Evan Neal out there. That's been consistent, near 30% for both. Right guard, 30-23, worse when Daniel Jones is in there. Center position, because no John Michael Schmitz, significantly worse, almost 2 times when Tyrod Taylor's been in there. So it's been the right kind of mixed bag where, right, you can basically say the line is bad. And to your point, it's going to be a historically bad offensive line for this team. The statement that I would make is also that if you put a perfect 100% offense, pick the best offensive line in the league and put Daniel Jones behind it and then put Tyrod behind it, Daniel Jones, I think, is going to be almost unequivocally the more talented quarterback, the more successful quarterback. However, by NFL standards, by modern NFL standards, we know the less mobile quarterbacks, the less and I'm talking pocket mobile. This is about, like, think about Tom Brady, one of the least mobile quarterbacks in the world, but his ability to manipulate his footwork inside of the pocket is what would buy those extra seconds, half fractional seconds to make those throws. I don't think Daniel Jones is very good at that. And that's maybe a season problem right now, or a couple season problem for the Giants and their line, but that's also going to be a problem even if this team was good, because that means that Daniel Jones is still behind the learning curve of how do I take us from being a team that wins most games to maybe loses a couple of close ones, right? Makes that big throw versus accidentally steps into pressure. And then you talk about the biggest stage in the playoffs. For a fifth year quarterback. That is a concerning thing for me beyond comparing him to Tyrod Taylor and beyond it being bad offensive line play this season.
Yeah, the toughest part, Adam, is we've seen when the offensive line is just mediocre at best towards the end of last season. Like, Daniel Jones still performed well last season using his legs, getting out in space. It just feels like to me it's taken another level this season about how poor the offensive line has played. It could
Oh, yeah.
be that we've played some really good defenses, in terms of people like Dallas and San Francisco. But yeah, it's very concerning. We're in year 5. These things need to be cleaned up. I agree with your sentiment. The better the offensive line, I think the better the quarterback's peak or high end can look.
Mhm.
And I think Daniel Jones's high end is probably better than Tyrod Taylor's. Probably, I would say almost assuredly is better
Right.
than Tyrod Taylor. But when we talk about what the floor is, it does, you bring it up, it does feel like if we just need to find a way to get to 13 points, like
Yeah.
I wonder if
Yeah.
Tyrod Taylor is the guy that can do that in certain situations, knowing how bad the offensive line is. I don't know if there's a good answer to this. I don't think the Giants have a good answer because they're still figuring out pulling guys off the street literally for the offensive
Mhm.
line. But it was good to see, and I'm wondering if it's because Tyrod was in there as opposed to Daniel Jones, seeing more Jalen Hyatt down the field, seeing more usage of Wandale Robinson. You just wonder if that was schematically done to say that this is the way that we can do this, throw 50-50 balls up to Jalen Hyatt and hopefully that he can high point the ball, or was it we don't think Daniel Jones can make these throws, but we think Tyrod Taylor can make these throws?
Yeah.
I think that's what I'm kind of noodling on to try to understand. And against Washington, it'll be interesting to see if Tyrod Taylor looks really good or if all these issues that we're talking about keep bubbling up if Daniel Jones can't play.
And a mixed bag of teams the Giants are going to play in the coming weeks, where we talk about some whether they're great defenses, they have great defensive fronts. Washington has some weapons there as well. But over the next handful of games, the Jets are not going to be a pretty one. Maybe against the Patriots. I mean, frankly, I was going to say the Raiders, but they got some guys that are going
Max
to get after you.
Crosby
So,
is a dude. Like he's a top 5 pass rusher in the league right now, no question about it.
and that's why it's not going to get that much easier. Maybe continuity helps get you there. Let's leave on this. At the end of the day, knowing what we know now with where this offensive line is, should the New York Football Giants have walked away from Daniel Jones in the offseason and entered this year saying, Tyrod Taylor, 33, 34 years old, you're our veteran. You're going to be a bridge to somebody, maybe beyond this season, maybe not. But we're not going to do this thing that we've done now. Commit to a quarterback, money or otherwise, knowing that this isn't right. We're not ready for this moment. We're not ready to convey to our fan base that we can compete right now. That's what we've learned over these first handful of games. I don't really, they could win a handful down the stretch here, all good things. But it feels like this franchise is not at the spot of being ready to compete, which makes paying for a quarterback, even for 2 years, seem like a somewhat irresponsible decision.
I have to give you pushback on that, Adam. If
Okay.
going into the season, you have an all pro, Pro Bowl level left tackle that got injured on one of the first series of the season and hasn't been right and hasn't been in games since then. He was supposed to solidify the line and say, at the very least, we don't have to worry about left tackle. And then
I know, but that's
every
one.
Okay. Everyone talked about Evan Neal's progression, thinking it was going to be an Andrew Thomas like progression to say,
Yep.
we
Yep.
drafted him in the first round. He got his feet underneath him. Now the right tackle is solidified. And then we go out and get one of the best centers in the draft to say, up the middle, let's put some draft capital against this offensive line. If we expect our Pro Bowler left tackle to play well, our center
Right.
to
Three
have
out
an
of five.
immediate impact because you can, and you have the right tackle, then we hope that Glowinski can be mediocre. We hope that Azudu can be there, maybe Bredesen, etc. And all of that falls apart the second that Andrew Thomas gets hurt. And now we have this shifting of offensive lines that's looked horrific. And so if you squint long enough, and I believe it to be true, that this offensive line going into the season had promised to get better. And it wasn't to be a top 5 offensive line in the league. It was say,
Mm-hmm.
don't be a bottom half offensive line in the league. If we can run a competent offense and be a top half of the league offensive line, I think the Giants would look more competitive than they have in these first few games.
Yeah, the Giants could have been 2-4, and we would have been feeling still pretty good about them over these first 6 games, given the matchups and expectations in all of those, right? So we'll be back in as the week concludes. We'll give our preview. We have a guest coming up tomorrow or onto Friday's show. That'll be a nice little crossover preview for a segment as well. What is Washington worried about, if anything, when they think about facing the New York Football Giants? And then, of course, will Daniel Jones ultimately play? We'll get into it all along with our fantasy previews and our pick'ems. So get over to YouTube, get over to Twitter at One Giant Podcast, at AndyMac214, and at Adam Armbrecht. Until the next time, as more questions just continue to surface around this roster, as Andrew Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.